Uh, my, my parents met and they married almost immediately in 1924, and it was a very difficult time because there was a great inflation in Germany at the time, and I remember that we as children had monopoly money, these millions of marks, which they'd had to use for buying bread. You had to have a whole bread basket, a whole washing basket full of money to buy perhaps one loaf of bread. So it was a very difficult time. Not quite as bad for them because apparently the Danzig inflation wasn't as great and they could change German money into Danzig and then change it back and make money that way. But it was very difficult life, I think. And then my brother was born 1926 and I was born 1927. And though my parents had often sort of played with the idea of emigrating, after all, my father was in his 50s with small children to keep. He didn't have the courage. And then, of course, things changed a bit when Hitler came, and in 1933, when I started school...
I'm going to stop you for a moment. We're going to go back because you're jumping. What was it like growing up in your family?
My father had his X-ray laboratory in the front of the big flat we were living in, and we were living in the back of the flat where we probably had about 4 or 5 rooms. When we were small, we had 2 maids, one general and one maid who was dealing with us, with the 2 of us, my brother and me, and she was a child's maid, not a nursery nurse, because my mother wanted to have full control of what she did. We also, from about that age, had an English miss, an au pair who was there, sometimes living in, sometimes living out, there purely to teach us to speak English. So actually we had the advantage of being able to speak English when we got to England. It may also have been a disadvantage because I think we have more of an accent having learned English in Germany. If we had learned it just when we got to England, we probably or possibly would have had less of an accent. But you know, it was
Go ahead.
It was a well-to-do family. We didn't have to ever sort of think about money. I think, though my mother said professionally wasn't the same business, money was much easier even for her.
Your mother attended a finishing school. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, she was really not at the finishing school in Switzerland. She was there as an au pair teaching German, and she was there to learn French. But she was there not so much as finishing school as to learn French, but also to sort of teach there a little bit, because after all she was possibly already a qualified teacher when she went there. And she did speak fluent French because of that, but English she had learned a little bit from all our English miss. My father knew no English till probably about a year before we came to England. When he took lessons, he was very much a classical scholar, Latin and Greek, which in my opinion completely spoils you for modern languages.
Did you learn French as well?
No, not till a little bit when I came to the English boarding school, and then when I came to the, what we call in England, the grammar school. When war broke out, my parents happened to be in Cambridge at a school for English for foreigners, and so when war broke out, we left the boarding school and went to live with them. And because we were thinking any day our American visas would come, everything was temporary, and we were in furnished accommodation all through the war. But I suppose I ought to say something about the Kindertransport.
before that, I'm going to get to the kinder transport, but are there any stories that you would want to tell prior to the war?
Yes. The story of me being das deutsche Mädchen, the German girl. One day I was about 6. An acquaintance of my mother just sort of said she wanted me to play with her daughter for an afternoon or something, and I knew they'd taken us to a photographer, but never knew any more. And then one day at the weekend we used to go walking in the woods or in Wannsee by the lakes by Berlin, very much with my cousins, the George and Hilda and Hilda. And Hilda was my very special friend. And suddenly, in a little village in a haberdashery, my brother, who was really a dreamer, says, "Look, there's Elsa in the window." And there are a big portrait of myself with plaits and 2 ribbons, and it said, "German girls wear ribbons again." And then we found that I was in every haberdashery shop.
And you didn't know that?
And later on, when ribbons weren't that fashionable, and right up to I think about 1938 or possibly 1939, I would be in quite a number of haberdashery shops, the German girl. My mother